Hello, thank you for joining the interview today. Thank you for having me. I see you didn't shave, looks like someone's been too focused on preparing. Exactly, had to prioritize studying over shaving. Fair point. Let's begin. This is an interview for the junior business analyst position. Are you ready?
Yes, ready.
Alright, let's start. What are the main tasks performed by a business analyst? A business analyst's main job is to understand the business need and help the team deliver the right solution. That means identifying problems or opportunities, eliciting and analyzing requirements, communicating with stakeholders, and making sure the delivered solution actually solves the business problem. In short, a BA connects business goals with the technical side, kind of like a translator between two worlds. Okay, nice start. Now, which business analysis techniques do you know? There are many, but some of the most common are interviews and workshops for eliciting requirements, brainstorming and document analysis, process modeling using BPMN, use cases, user stories and prototyping, and analytical tools like SWOT analysis, root cause analysis, and the 5 whys. Basically, I try to choose the technique that best fits the situation and the people I'm working with. Got it. So what are the key concepts of business analysis? According to Babok, they are described in the business analysis core concept model. It includes 6 core concepts: change, need, solution, stakeholder, value, and context. Everything in business analysis connects to these 6 elements. We analyze a need for change in a specific context involving stakeholders to deliver a solution that creates value. It's basically the foundation for all BA work. Let's talk about stakeholders. Who are they and how do you usually analyze them? Stakeholders are anyone who's affected by the change or can influence it. Users, customers, managers, developers, or even regulators. When I analyze them, I look at their level of influence, their interest, expectations, and communication needs. I usually use a stakeholder matrix mapping interest versus influence to plan how to engage with each group effectively. What about definition of ready and definition of done? How would you explain what they mean and how they differ? Definition of ready means that a user story or task is clear, small, and well understood, so the team can start working on it. Definition of done means it's fully completed, developed, tested, documented, and meets acceptance criteria. So basically, ready means we can start, and done means we are finished. Can you explain the difference between a business requirement and a business rule? A business requirement describes what the organization wants to achieve. For example, the system must allow customers to cancel their booking online. A business rule defines how that process should work, like a booking can only be cancelled at least 24 hours before the scheduled time. So the requirement focuses on the goal while the rule defines the condition and limitations around it. Let's move to SMART goals. What does the SMART acronym stand for? SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's used to make sure objectives are clear and realistic. So, improve the system isn't SMART, but reduce response time by 30% within 3 months is. Alright, let's talk about Agile. How would you explain Agile, Scrum, and Kanban, and what's the difference between them? Agile is a mindset. It's about delivering value iteratively and adapting to change. Scrum is a framework under Agile. It defines roles like product owner, Scrum master, and ceremonies like sprint planning and retrospectives. Kanban is a workflow method that focuses on visualizing work and limiting work in progress. So Agile is the philosophy, Scrum gives structure, and Kanban helps manage flow. And in reality, most teams use a mix of both. And how would you describe the difference between Waterfall and Agile? Waterfall is sequential. You complete one phase before moving to the next. Agile is iterative. You deliver smaller pieces of value in cycles and adjust along the way. In Waterfall, feedback usually comes at the end. In Agile, it happens every sprint. It's like building a house room by room versus living in one part while still improving the rest. Let's talk about the backlog. How is it usually created? The backlog usually starts from business goals and high-level features. Then it's broken down into epics and user stories, prioritized based on value, risk, and dependencies. The product owner owns it, but the BA helps make sure every item is clear, testable, and aligned with the business needs. So it's a mix of analysis, collaboration, and a bit of negotiation. Alright, let's talk about requirements. How would you define what a requirement actually is? A requirement is something that explains what needs to be done to solve a business problem. It describes what stakeholders expect from the solution, what it should do or how it should work. In short, it's a clear statement of need that helps everyone understand what the goal is. And what type of requirements do you know? According to Babok, there are several levels. Business requirements, basically high-level goals or objectives of the organization. Stakeholder requirements, what individual stakeholder need to achieve those goals. Solution requirements, divided into functional and non-functional, describing what the solution should do and how it should perform. And transition requirements, what's needed to move from the current state to the future one, like data migration or user training. Together they form the full hierarchy, from business vision to implementation details. How about non-functional requirements? Can you name the main types? Non-functional requirements describe how the system performs rather than what it does. The main types include performance, something like system speed and response time, security, things like protecting data and managing user access, usability, how intuitive and easy the interface is to use, reliability and availability, how stable the system is and how often it's up, and also scalability, maintainability, and compatibility, how well the system grows, is supported and works with others. Basically, they define the quality attributes of the solution. Let's talk about requirements elicitation. Which techniques are used for eliciting requirements? The most common techniques are interviews and workshops, observation or job shadowing, surveys and questionnaires, document analysis, brainstorming, prototyping to visualize ideas, interface analysis, and process modeling to see the steps of a business process to understand how work flows and where the problem or opportunities are. All of these are mentioned in Babok, and I try to apply a mix of them depending on the project and how available the stakeholders are. And even though it's not part of any official guide, I know someone who worked on a legacy project where reverse engineering became the main source of requirements. Basically, they analyzed the existing code and how the system worked. So, in real life, that also can be a valid elicitation technique. How can you tell that requirements are well written or high quality? According to Babok, good requirements have certain qualities. They should be clear, concise, and unambiguous, so everyone understands them the same way. They need to be complete and consistent, meaning no missing details and no contradictions. They should also be feasible, testable, and prioritized, so the team knows what can actually be delivered and in what order. And finally, every requirement should be traceable back to a business goal or need. In short, if a requirement is easy to understand, realistic to implement, and supports a clear business objectives, that's a high quality requirement. Imagine you have two different requirements. How would you go about prioritizing them? I'd start by looking at business value, which requirement provides more benefit to stakeholders or supports the main business goal. Then I think about urgency, risk, and dependencies, since some requirements might need to be delivered earlier to enable others. Babok also mentions techniques like 100 points method or value versus effort analysis. I haven't used them in practice yet, but I understand how they work and would apply with the guidance if needed. The main idea is to make sure that the most valuable and important requirements are handled first. Let's move to acceptance criteria. How would you explain what they are? Acceptance criteria define the conditions that must be met for a requirement or user story to be considered complete and accepted by stakeholders. They set clear boundaries for a feature and help developers and testers understand exactly what done means. For example, given a manager views a dashboard. When there is no available data, then the dashboard displays no data available message. Acceptance criteria make requirements testable and help ensure that everyone from business to QA shares the same understanding of the expected result. And which project artifacts does a business analyst usually create? It really depends on the project, but common BA artifacts include requirements documentation or Confluence pages. That's where all the key details and updates are stored. Then there are user stories and acceptance criteria, basically the main format for capturing and communicating requirements in agile projects. Also, use cases, process models, and flow diagrams. Those help visualize how the system or process actually works. Business rules, data models, and wireframes, those describe logic, data structure, and interface concepts. And others like traceability matrices or release notes, which help keeping everything connected and documented for delivery. Let's talk about documentation. What types of documents are usually used in business analysis? There are different types depending on the project and methodology. In Agile, the documentation is usually lighter. Things like user stories, acceptance criteria, process flows, and Confluence pages. In more traditional or hybrid projects, you might also see business requirements documents, functional specifications, and a vision and scope document that defines the overall goals and boundaries of the project. Alright, can you walk me through the standard structure of a use case? A typical use case includes several key parts. It starts with the name. Every use case has a unique name, usually a short phrase with a verb and a noun, something like submit order or generate report. Next is the goal, a short statement that explains what the actor wants to achieve and what success looks like. Then we have the actors, the people or systems that interact with the solution. The main one is called the primary actor, and there can also be secondary actors that support the process. After that comes the preconditions, things that might already be true before the use case can start. Then there is the trigger. That's the event that starts the use case, for example, when the user clicks submit order or when a scheduled job runs automatically. Next is the flow of events, basically the step-by-step interaction between the actor and the system. It usually includes a main flow and sometimes alternative or exception flows for different outcomes. And finally, post-conditions or guarantees. These describe what must be true once the use case ends, both for success and unsuccessful results. Altogether, it shows how the actor and the system interacts from start to finish to reach a specific goal. How about user stories? What's their typical structure? A user story usually follows a simple structure. As a type of user, I want some goal or action, so that the reason or benefit. After that, we add acceptance criteria that define when it's considered done. For example, as a customer, I want to reset my password so that I can regain access if I forget it. It's short, focused on value, and easy for everyone to understand. And how would you explain the difference between a use case and a user story? A use case is more detailed and shows the entire flow of interaction between a user and a system, including different paths and conditions. A user story is shorter and focuses on a single goal or feature from the user's perspective. Use cases are common in more formal or complex projects, while user stories are typical in agile environments. How do you usually create a user story map? To create a user story map, I start by identifying the main user goals or activities. These form the top row. Under each goal, I list the tasks or steps a user takes to achieve it. Then I break those steps into user stories that can be delivered in smaller pieces. The map helps visualize the whole user journey and shows how stories fit together. It's great for prioritizing features and planning releases because you can see the big picture in one view. Let's talk about INVEST. What does this acronym stand for? INVEST is a checklist for writing good user stories. It stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. It helps make sure each story can stand on its own, provides clear value, and can be tested once it's finished. If a story meets all six, it's usually well written. And when it comes to prototypes, which tools do you know or have worked with? There are quite a few popular ones. I'm familiar with Figma, Miro, and Balsamic, which are great for creating wireframes and interactive prototypes. In some teams, people also use Adobe XD or even Draw.io, which is now diagrams.net for quick sketches. Yeah. The main goal is to visualize ideas early, get feedback, and adjust before development starts. Now, let's talk about modeling. What types of notations are you familiar with? There are a few common types of notations used in business analysis. The main ones are UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language, and BPMN, or Business Process Model and Notation. UML is mostly used for describing systems and their structure, while BPMN is great for showing how business processes work from start to finish. And which UML diagrams do you know? Can you give some examples of how they're used? There are quite a few UML diagrams, but the most common ones for business analysts are use case diagram, which shows how users interacts with the system. It's great for explaining scope and the user's roles. Activity diagram, which shows the flow of actions or decisions, similar to a process map. Sequence diagram, which describes how components or systems communicate with each other over time. Class diagram, which shows the structure of the system, things like entities, attributes, and their relationships. And the state diagram, which describes how an object or entity changes states over the time. For example, how an order goes from created to confirmed, shipped, and delivered. Let's say the client doesn't read or approve requirements. What would you do in that situation? That happens sometimes. First, I would try to understand why. Maybe the document is too long, too technical, or they just don't have time. Then I'd make it easier for them. Maybe walk them through it during a short meeting, highlight the key parts, or summarize the most important points in a simpler format. If that still doesn't help, I'd involve the project manager or product owner, because having confirmed requirements is crucial before moving to development. Alright, imagine this. Model the process of withdrawing cash from an ATM. Sure. It could look something like this. First, the customer inserts the card into the ATM. Next, the system asks for the PIN and the customer enters it. The system verifies the PIN, and if it's correct, the customer selects withdraw cash and enters the amount. Then the ATM checks the account balance. If there is enough money, it dispenses the cash and updates the balance. Finally, the system prints a receipt and returns the card. That's the main flow. Alternative scenarios could include things like incorrect PIN or insufficient funds. And finally, imagine you are working on an e-commerce project, building an order tracking app. Orders go through several stages before delivery. How would you explain to developers how the system should handle orders, and what tool would you use? In that case, I'd use a state diagram to show how an order moves through different statuses like created, confirmed, packed, shipped, and delivered. It clearly shows what actions or events trigger each state change. This helps developers understand the logic and conditions for transitions, and it's easy to update. Later, if new stages appear, if needed, I might also support it with a short process flow or a sequence diagram for extra clarity. That's all the questions I had for today. Thank you for your time. You did really well. Thanks. I hope that means I got the job. That depends. Let's say we'll decide based on how many likes this video gets. Oh, so stakeholders approval, I see. Exactly. And if it goes well, we'll schedule a middle BA interview. But this time make sure you shave. Okay.